What's going on, guys? Hope you're all having a fantastic day. In today's video, we're going to begin discussing the Scotch Gambit. So let's just jump into it. We have pawn to e4, e5, knight comes to f3, knight c6, d4, e takes d4, and bishop to c4. We sacrifice this pawn. We quickly develop our bishop here on c4. We're already putting pressure on the pawn on f7, and we're ready to castle already. So a very good idea. Now, what is black going to do here? There's a lot of things that black can do. For example, knight to f6 is by far the most common move, and it's the one we're going to discuss in today's video. But what else can black do? Well, black can go bishop e7. They can also go for bishop to c5, protecting the pawn here on d4 for as long as possible. Or they can also go bishop to b4, check, putting pressure on our king right away, in which case we're going to have to play c3. And this can lead to a lot of complications, but we're not going to discuss those moves in this video. We're going to do that in another video. In today's video, we're simply going to go and discuss knight to f6. And here, by far, the most common move is pawn to e5. But at the end of the video, I'm going to give you another move that white can play here that can lead to very tricky positions. So after pawn to e5, black usually responds with pawn to d5. And here, we do not really want to capture here en passant, because after bishop takes on d6, notice that it is black who has the lead in development, and they also have an extra pawn as well. So we do not want to go pawn takes on d6 en passant. As well, we do not want to take this knight on f6, because after pawn takes here on c4, we take on g7, bishop takes on g7, and after both sides castle, if you look at the position, black has an extra pawn. They have the bishop pair, and yes, they're missing a pawn here on the king side on their castled king, but this bishop on g7 is going to be a great defender of the black king. Not to mention, it's going to be very difficult for white to develop either the knight on b1 and the bishop on c1 to any good squares. So after this move d5, what white wants to do is simply put this bishop on b5 and tell black, hey, I'm still attacking your knight, what are you going to do? Well, black is going to simply go knight to e4. And here we're going to go ahead and capture this pawn on d4, taking advantage of the fact that now this bishop is pinning this knight to the king. So black usually plays bishop to d7 and bishop takes on c6. We do not want to simply castle in this position, because this will make the defensive task of black very easy. For example, they could just simply simplify here. Simplify. Doesn't make any sense. But they can just simplify here with knight takes on d4, and after bishop takes on d7, queen takes on d7, queen takes on d4, and just look at this. The bishop comes to c5. Black has two developed pieces. Look at our pieces here. And after we move this queen, they're going to either castle queenside or kingside. They're going to have a much better position. So we do not want to castle after the bishop comes to d7. Instead, what we want to do is take on c6, and after pawn takes on c6, we are going to castle now. So let's take a look at this position. What does white have for going for them, and how about black? So white, our king is already safe. Yes, we are a little bit behind in development, but look at our pawn structure. It's a beautiful pawn structure. So we're going to be able to develop our pieces now and have control, based on the pawn structure that we have. What about black? Well, black can simply just put a rook in the half open b file, which is usually useful. Another key move here is to go queen to b8, queen to b6, which is also very useful in a lot of times. They have the bishop pair, and what are they missing? Well, they need to castle their king, they need to complete their development, and of course, they have these two double pawns here. So these are all the pros and cons for the black position as well as the white position. So after we castle here with white, black usually plays this bishop to c5. Now, picture this position in your head, because it's going to be very important. We're going to have the same position, but with the difference is that this pawn's not going to be on f2, it's going to be on f4. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to attack this knight, pawn to f3. This knight doesn't have any useful squares. It's going to go to g5, the only square that doesn't get recaptured. And after pawn to f4, yes, the knight can go to e6, but the most common move is knight to e4 here. And we have the same position, but with this pawn already on f4, which is very useful. Not only does it protect the pawn on e5, but it's ready to go f5, f6, and start creating chaos around the black king position if the black ever decides to castle kingside. So that's one thing. Now, it's our move here, so we're gonna go bishop to e3. Our knight was being pinned to the king here, and we really don't want that. So bishop to e3, and by far the most common move in this position is bishop to b6, getting ready for some c5, maybe d4 ideas. So here, if we look at the position again, what is black's most potent? What is the strongest piece that black has in their position? Well, it's this beautiful knight on e4. So we're going to play knight to d2 and attempt to trade this knight. And of course, black has to go for it. Knight takes d2, queen takes d2. And here, black simply castles. Now, both sides have completed their development. Their king is safe. So how can white continue their play here? What are some common ideas? This is usually what people get wrong when they're studying their openings. They go through all the moves, but then they don't know what to do once the opening phase of the game is over. Well, one common idea that I have used in the past, and I have seen other grandmasters use in the past, is to put this pawn here on b4. The idea is that it keeps an eye on this square on c5, a very strong hold here on this square. And what you want to do then is go knight to b3 and put this bishop on c5, or even the knight on c5. And it's going to be very difficult for black to untangle here if they allow those moves. Matter of fact, if black allows the knight to come to b3 on the next move, they're going to have a very difficult position ahead of them. That is simply why they usually go c5 here themselves, or they start targeting the center right away with moves like f6 and moves like queen to e7. So to putting pressure on the pawn already. So pawn to b4, controlling the square on c5 is a very major idea you need to know. Another thing you can do here is to play this position very slowly. You can just put a rook here on the center with rook to e1, and then go pawn to c3, queen to f2, and then start rolling your pawns forward slowly. But once you have your pieces in better squares, not the rook here on a1. The move that I like the most, and that's just because I'm more of an aggressive player, is to go directly for the throw. I like to go queen to f2 and simply go f5, f6, and just imagine a position in which your pawn reaches the square on f6 and your opponent has to play this move g6. Well, then you go queen f4, queen h6, queen g7, checkmate. This is the way I like to play this position, but of course your opponent is also going to make some moves. They're not just going to allow you to get all these moves and the checkmate. So I told you at the beginning that there's a couple of ways to play this. So going back, we have e4, e5, knight to f3, knight c6. We go, not bishop to c4. We have to play this move, d4, e takes on d4, and after bishop c4, knight to f6, we play e5, and we already looked at some of the things that could happen after e5. But what happens if we simply castle here, offering yet another pawn here by black? If they take this pawn, they have to go into so many complications. Well, first we're going to pin this knight, and they have to do something, otherwise we're just going to win this piece for free. They play d5, and here we start hitting black with a couple of beautiful moves. The first one is going to be bishop takes on d5. This is going to come as a shocker for a lot of players if they don't know this variation. This knight's hanging now, and there's nothing that can protect it, so they have to just take this bishop. And here comes the second shocker. We go knight to c3, and everything is pinned. They cannot take this knight because the queen is hanging, and well, obviously we are ready to take this knight with two pieces, and we're hitting the queen. So you're going to have a lot of fun playing this position. Black needs to be extremely careful in order to keep the balance. Of course, black is up a pawn, and if they're able to deal with all the threats, they should have a perfectly fine game, but they need to know this. One bad move here and the game collapses for black. That is all I have for you guys today. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Stay safe and have a wonderful day.